Hello darlings and welcome back to the channel. It's been a minute since we've done any kind of video essaying, and you know what, I was feeling inspired by a little kerfuffle I got into on Twitter over San Andreas Remastered. If you've been in the industry or in any real industry spaces, you may have heard about the controversial re-releases of Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And while I am here to talk about the remaster of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, it's not for the reason you might be expecting. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is a lot of things. It's a controversial game from a venerated series. It's a classic and masterpiece of game design that influenced and changed how open worlds are made forever. It's a beloved childhood and youth classic for many kids who are probably younger than the M rating suggested they'd be when they played it. And it's also an outdated and bigoted game. Rockstar has often traded on its flimsy satire of American culture to define the world of Grand Theft Auto. But the early 2000s culture in which San Andreas was made was a culture of jackass and Eminem, one obsessed with being as transgressive and offensive as possible with very little reason behind who was being targeted, aside from how easy a target they were. With the recent Grand Theft Auto Definitive Editions dropping, which promised to deliver the titular definitive edition of 3 classic games through refined controls and gameplay and a slew of technical and graphical improvements, I figured that Rockstar would take the time to change some of the more outdated and bigoted elements of GTA's world and storytelling, in keeping with the implied goal of creating versions of the games that could be enjoyed by modern audiences in the year 2021. And Rockstar fucked up on every conceivable level. Now, I'm not here to talk about the absolute shit show that GTA Definitive Edition's launch has been, and honestly, there's nothing I could contribute to the conversation that people with bigger platforms haven't already done. No, instead, I want to talk about a San Andreas mission where the player participates in an active hate crime, hunting down and shooting a gay man to death simply because the player character's friend doesn't want anyone to know he was gay. I don't bring this up to cause a kerfuffle or try to cancel the game. I originally brought this up with a little tweet I thought my followers would appreciate. But then that tweet spawned a litany of backlash against me. While I figured I would encounter a few people who disagreed with the take, I figured most would just call me woke and move on. But not only did I get that, I also got death threats, purposeful misgenderings, and mostly a lot of people saying the character CJ killed was a rapist who stole OG Loke's rhymes and thus deserved it in the context of the story. With that in mind, I was accused of cherry-picking examples to fit an agenda, of being a fragile snowflake who's never played a GTA and is too weak to handle the rough and tumble reality of a 2004 video game, and also of being racist? So I'd like to take the most common complaints one at a time because while I hardly think this game's narrative is worth the effort to unpack, I think it is important to talk about this as an example of media literacy on the internet, and it exemplifies how many people consume media in general. On that note, to the people breathlessly defending the sanctity of San Andreas, look y'all, I get this may have been one of the first games you played with a world and story that drew you in, but this game is almost 20 years old. It's not perfect, and it's far from the high art some responses seem to infer it as, depicting it as an intentionally scathing and nuanced critique of the possible attitude of the day, rather than a childish playground filled with 69 jokes. Look, I get it. I once thought that the Call of Duty games were nuanced and gritty portrayals of war and sacrifice. But I was 14 then, and I don't think that way anymore. Which brings me to my first point about media literacy. It's okay for things to change. It's okay for us to grow past things we love to see that they have flaws and admit those flaws are part of the product. A lot of people seem to think this was my first time playing the game, or that I was screaming at the screen and getting ready to write Rockstar a petition, when in reality, I wrote a few tweets expressing disappointment that a homophobic part of the game wasn't removed to help better reflect modern sensibilities and attitudes. And when I was done writing those tweets, I played the game for 6 more hours that day. So there's no need to be so defensive, especially over a game like this. But even more so when you're just flagrantly wrong about it, which brings me to the second part of my talk on media literacy today. Holy fuck, people need to learn about subtext. So the main arguments against my point that CJ engages in a hate crime boil down to OG Loke says Freddy stole his rhymes, Freddy makes a drop the soap joke, meaning that Freddy raped OG Loke, and that CJ is meant to be a morally ambiguous character. Now, all of this backlash got me to wonder if I was wrong, if I had jumped the gun and made a mistake, and had I just jumped to a conclusion? Had I truly been blinded by my politics? To make sure, I played the mission again, loading an old save, and sure enough, all those things are said, all of those things do happen. But that's not all that happens. You see, subtext is all about reading between the lines. In something like GTA, the designers use subtext for ironic humor. Things that are meant to be funny not because of what's actually said, but what's inferred by saying it. A lot of the satirical radio commercials are good examples, serving as over-the-top and very boilerplate parodies of American fixations with guns, violence, and sex. They aren't funny in themselves, it's the recognition of what they're saying about culture that's meant to be funny. Another great example is this mission. While it's true that OG Loc accuses Freddy of stealing his rhymes and dissing him, it's kinda important to look at the rest of his character and what else is said during the mission. Like, literally, the first thing Sweet and Big Smoke say about him is that he's a wannabe tough guy who will do anything to get street rep. They constantly joke about him being a pussy, and he's always trying to find some way to manipulate his way to the top. When you pick up Loc, he claims his new job given to him by his parole officer is to be a hygiene technician, but later it's revealed that he's actually just a dishwasher at some shitty fast food place. So, right off the bat, we know he's probably not the most trustworthy person. This isn't reading very far into his admittedly thin character. This is intentional from the game's writers. But then we get to Freddy's house. Freddy immediately says he doesn't need Loc anymore, that it was just a prison thing, to which Loc immediately says, I don't know what he's talking about. See, going back to subtext, we've already gleaned that Loc, who isn't very trustworthy, will do anything to preserve what little rep he has. And now we can glean that he had some kind of relationship with Freddy. Now, a lot of people said that Freddy was a rapist, but there's nothing really to support that. Freddy doesn't taunt Loc about taking advantage of him, but rather says he doesn't need him anymore because he has other dudes to hook up with now on the outside, saying that their relationship was just a prison thing. While he does say the line about dropping the soap, that doesn't always imply rape, it could just be a joke about prison sex, and Loc doesn't even try to deny that anything happens. Also, looking at the time it came out in, a drop the soap joke was probably considered pretty edgy and funny. And finally, as Freddy leaves, he says probably the most important line to the subtext here, I don't know anything about any rhymes. So what can we infer then? Well, from what we know about OG Loc, he's inherently untrustworthy, he's conniving, and will do anything for street rep, and he's taken to a house under the pretext of someone dissing him and stealing rhymes. But when you get there, there's no rhymes. The Book of Rhymes is never recovered from Freddy or brought up again. Instead, you overhear a conversation where Freddy implies a consensual and mutually beneficial prison relationship, and that he doesn't need OG Loc for that anymore. And wouldn't you know it, there are plenty of other lines that illustrate to the player that Freddy didn't rape Loc but was in a consensual relationship in prison. He yells at Loc, I thought you were keen, cute buns, insinuating that he thought that Loc was openly gay. And when you chase down Freddy to an ambush from a rival gang, the first thing he says is he broke my heart, referring to Loc's betrayal and trying to kill him. And here's where the subtext really boils down to. Here's the humor. It's meant to be funny that the player was brought here as Loc tries to play the cool, edgy gangster rapper, only for it to be revealed to the player that he actually had a prison sweetheart. Here's the truly outdated part of this all, the idea that gay sex is inherently emasculating, and the inference that OG Loc is any less of a man for having a relationship in prison. Another criticism I saw of my tweet is that the game takes place in the 90s and is meant to reflect the negative attitudes of the time, including homophobia, but that doesn't mean it agrees with them. While that could be true, the subtext here really says different. CJ doesn't ever criticize Loc for wanting Freddy dead. He doesn't ever openly doubt Loc's story. CJ pokes fun at him after killing Freddy, but Loc just brushes it off and says he's gangsta. There's no critique of killing a gay man to keep him silent, it's just something that happens after the character is played for laughs. The presentation of Freddy isn't inherently satirical either, it's just an exaggerated stereotype of every gay cliché that was cool to make fun of in the early 2000s, from a fixation with asses to a whiny and flamboyant speech pattern. There's absolutely a way to turn a plot like this into a critique of 90s gangster culture. But this mission isn't interested. And that point of critique has less to do with the subtext of what's said than it does the context of the events the player takes part in. Which brings me to my final point about media, and more specifically game criticism. Context in gameplay matters. I've seen people proclaiming that, well, the game is one where you can murder thousands of civilians, sleep with hookers, sex work shouldn't be a crime by the way, and that engages in casual racism against blacks and Asians. Therefore, me pointing out that a gay person is targeted for being gay is just cherry-picking to fit my agenda. I was even called racist for this, inferring that because I pointed this mission out, I felt guilty about killing a virtual gay person, but felt nothing for killing dozens of virtual black people. Which is wrong, because I don't feel bad for killing any virtual people. The difference between those, with the exception of the racism, which, yeah, also should have maybe been toned down a bit overall, is that they have consequences. Ruthlessly murdering a gay man to cover up a friend's sexual activities doesn't. In fact, players are rewarded. They go on like nothing happened, they get to continue the story and literally gain respect. Other killings are rewarded, sure, but for the most part the victims are nameless goons that attack you and your gang and legion. This is a specifically named character, who is targeted specifically for having a gay relationship with another character. The context of what's happening is important, just like the context of, within gameplay, the player is rewarded by killing him, is also important. Another point that was leveled against me was that this game is 20 years old at this point, and I was just bringing this up to cause a fuss now, as if nobody had a problem with it before. And personally, at least to an extent, that's true. I have played San Andreas before many times, but it's been several years and this mission completely slipped my mind until I came up to it again, cringing at how vile the content seemed now. And there's something to be said for that retrospective. San Andreas, and by extension the GTA series, was always controversial. Hell, that goes for all of Rockstar's output in general during the early 2000s. From Bully to Manhunt, every game they made for a while seemed to generate headlines and get the eternal hate boner of Jack Thompson revving again. San Andreas was no different, and when it released, it faced a litany of backlash for glorifying gang life and promoting things like murdering prostitutes, etc., etc. We all remember what our parents said. There was also the now infamous Hot Coffee mission, which saw the main character having sex through a minigame which was cut from the final game after outcry. And I mean, who can blame them? Can you imagine what kind of weird perverts we'd have running around if their first sexual awakenings came from these pretty polygons? But much like I don't remember how awful this mission was, it didn't seem to register on anyone's radar when it came out. I'm sure there were gay or closeted people who played the mission and felt understandably queasy, but there weren't gaming outlets or YouTube essayists who wanted to have deeper conversations about representation in gaming in 2004. So, unless Fox News was mad at it, a game controversy would mostly avoid mainstream detection. In 2021, though, it feels very different. We've had conversations about representation. The media landscape has largely moved past stereotypes of gay people and how they act, and game criticism takes into account things like context and subtext in gameplay and storytelling. All of these things are just a natural part of how a medium evolves, through criticism, taking what doesn't work and shedding it to create a more efficient and evocative storytelling medium. My criticism wasn't about trying to cancel a nearly 20-year-old game, but a comment on its proclaimed definitive edition not being anywhere near definitive by modern standards. The game isn't up to today's standards because it does nothing to address its own importance in culture, and the place it had in influencing a culture of homophobia and homophobic violence, with missions just like this one. And here's the thing, I shouldn't have to take this throwaway mission so seriously. A joke mission in a game with not great writing from 2004 doesn't warrant this level of scrutiny, but between people reading my criticism in total bad faith and missing the subtext surrounding any of it, I had to break it down to a bare essentials like this. Things like context and subtext are essential to understanding media, its messages and how they come across, but unfortunately a lot of people have no idea where to even start interacting with these ideas. A huge problem is that we don't teach media literacy in schools or from parents, to which I hear some say, well, we don't need classes where kids just watch TV and movies. And that might have been true 20 years ago, but the way information is disseminated has changed so drastically that media isn't just something that you consume individually, but it consumes all of us collectively. You can't work in a career without being inundated with media from all over the place, yet most people with a refined critical eye have to spend years crafting and cultivating those critical skills, often from journalistic frameworks to make heads or tails of what a piece of media is saying with its subtext or why its context matters. It's why there are so many nimrods like Hambone over here who will judge something as being woke or propaganda or whatever because it simply has a strong female lead without actually bothering to examine the culture surrounding it or the subtext contained therein. It's why so many other dipshits will scoff at people calling things like RoboCop, X-Men, Star Wars, and most recently Squid Game, and countless other properties political, despite the often very well documented histories of those properties and the messages they were engineered to send. Art is a reflection of the artists who make it and the times in which they were made. Does that mean Rockstar is homophobic? No. Does it mean someone who made the game wants to hate crime gay people? Also no. Just like context is important to understand inside of a game, it's also important outside. The context here being that San Andreas came out in 2004, when attitudes around queer people were drastically different than they are now. It was okay to be a punchline and a punching bag for masculinity, like Freddy is here. It was the golden era of South Park, a time when transgressive names like Eminem and Marilyn Manson were still feared by parents everywhere. It's not surprising that this mission was in a game from 2004. But looking back also gives context to its place in pop culture. San Andreas was a lightning rod of controversy for Rockstar, who was busy fending off Jack Thompson and like-minded gaming censorists left and right. From Manhunt to Bully, and most importantly San Andreas' own hot coffee mission, Rockstar courted controversy and spat in the face of the uptight conservative attitudes that caused that same controversy to shepherd untold masses of youth towards their product. And I think it says a lot about the difference in when this came out and today that the game drew ire for a sex scene that was cut, but not a hate crime like this. It says a lot that so many other people can look at this and agree that it has no place in 2021, because as a society we've changed. We realize that it's not funny to rely on tired stereotypes to punch down on vulnerable people and target them simply for being themselves. And to bring it all back around, the only thing I was ever pointing out is that a mission like this has no place in a modern game. And if Rockstar truly wanted this to be the definitive version of their game, it should have been made to modern standards of content as well as gameplay. But honestly, seeing how the rest of it turned out, I'm not surprised. Hello everybody, and thank you for watching, and special thanks to all my patrons who have stuck with me through this month. I know I haven't put out as many videos as I would have liked, but like I said, it has been a crazy busy season lately. I do have one more video in my Ranking of Shooter series planned for this November, and then next month I will be hopefully doing 2 of those videos, as well as a top 10 and possibly another video essay if I can find the time. As always, please check out and share all of my videos. Like, subscribe, do all the things, and if you feel so inclined, donations are always appreciated at Ko-Fi and of course Patreon if you want to get your name listed here alongside all these other wonderful, wonderful people. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.